Hey, thanks a lot, Raphael. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Harvey Morrison, the CEO at Marion Square, and I'm excited to lead this discussion today around preparing for OMB's PQC reporting. I think this session is very timely in that we're seeing a growing number of federal agencies focused on their migration to post-quantum cryptography. Not necessarily because quantum computers have suddenly arrived, but because OMB PQC reporting deadlines, I think, are now forcing conversations like this sort of out into the open. For many agencies, the immediate question isn't, how do we migrate to post-quantum algorithms tomorrow? I think it's what exactly is OMB asking agencies to report on, and how can agencies answer those questions confidently and defensively? What we've observed across government is that PQC reporting quickly exposes deeper structural issues, potentially, things like fragmented visibility, unclear ownership, and environments that were never designed for cryptographic change. That's why today's session is not about specific tools or algorithms or vendors. Instead, it's about how agencies can approach OMB PQC reporting in a way that is practical, defensible, and I think most importantly, really turning this into a program that is sustainable over time. So as we go through this, we're going to walk through really kind of a simple framework. First, we're going to talk about understanding what the reporting requirements require. Second, we want to understand what is your current cryptographic posture of your agency. And then third, building a crypto agile program that allows agencies to continue to report, and I think really importantly, adapt continuously as requirements and challenges evolve. The goal is that you leave today with clarity around a few things. One, clarity on what OMB reporting actually requires, clarity on why ad hoc or point in time approaches that some agencies are taking or thinking about really kind of create risk. And then clarity on how to think about PQC as a long-term operational capability, not a one-time compliance exercise. And I think that's really the key here. I'm joined today by two executives who have been following and participating in the space for quite some time now. As Raphael mentioned, Jacque Henderson, the founder and CEO of Square Peg, and Evgeny Gervais, the CEO here at SafeLogic. So what I'll do is, gentlemen, I'll let you introduce yourselves. Jacque, we'll start with you and maybe just give us a high-level overview of Square Peg, and then Evgeny will let you give a high-level overview of SafeLogic.
Sure, thanks, Harvey. Hello, everyone. Again, I'm Jacque Henderson, founder and CEO of Square Peg Technologies. So Square Peg is a enterprise data solutions firm, and some of our specialties are quantum security services, enterprise data, and digital monetization. So think data collection at scale, whether it be mission critical data for intelligence community, Department of Defense, or also cybersecurity data, and helping organizations prepare their organizations for scale, for future threats and for threats today.
Awesome. Thanks, Jacque. Evgeny, you want to go?
Sure. Thank you, Harvey, and thank you to the Carahsoft team for having us today. Really appreciate it. I'm Evgeny Gervais, CEO at SafeLogic. I also have the honor of running the PQC migration workstream for NIST and CCOE for discovery, prioritization, and risk management. SafeLogic is a cryptographic software company. We've been around for about 14 years. Our specialty is FIPS, validated cryptographic software. Many of the companies on the call today, may already be using SafeLogic software, and certainly their customers, the federal agencies, are using it as well. So we've been around for a while. We've obviously been very focused on perhaps the greatest transition in the world of cryptography, the post-quantum cryptography transition. So all of our software products are PQC ready, and we're ready to support our customers with that. And we also do a lot of work in areas like crypto agility, which I'm sure we'll be touching on later today. So thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you. Next slide, if you would, Abby, please. And for those of you who don't know Marion Square, we're an advisory firm that works really at the intersection, or we like to say at the intersection of government and technology. partnering with federal agencies and innovative technology companies to really bring mission-aligned solutions into the federal market that we like to say solve real-world problems. So again, thanks for joining us today. One other comment I'm going to make, Abby, if you'll go ahead to the next slide here, is I'm going to be monitoring the questions as we go through. So this will be a conversation amongst the three of us, but if you have questions that are related to a slide, please pop them in the chat, and if we can get them answered during the session, we will, and if not, we'll answer them at the end. So with that, let's kind of dive in. So one of the reasons we're seeing, we think, so much activity around post-quantum cryptography right now is that OMB has moved this from future guidance into reporting expectations. Under OMB, M2302, which if you followed the space, this was really the original memo that kicked things off for PQC. Agencies were required to submit an initial cryptographic inventory and post-quantum migration plan back in 2023. Now, the important part of this is OMB didn't intend this to be a one-time exercise. This was supposed to be an ongoing process or program. So agencies are expected, according to 2302, to maintain, update, and submit that inventory on an ongoing basis. So what OMB is asking for is not, as we've discussed before, an immediate migration. Instead, agencies must be able to demonstrate that they understand where cryptography is used, how exposed they are to quantum risks, and that they have a credible risk-based plan they can report on in a defensible way over time. At the same time, many federal systems protect data with long confidentiality lifespans, and the harvest now, decrypt later threat model means decisions made today really have long-term consequences. When you combine that reality with recurring reporting expectations, PQC stops being theoretical, and it really becomes something agencies must be able to explain, document, and manage as an ongoing program. So now we've talked about why OMB reporting is driving action right now. The next step, I think, is to understand how federal post-quantum direction is actually structured. And I think this matters because different authorities play very different roles, and confusing them leads to bad planning, unnecessary risk, misaligned investments, and just general confusion. But before we move on to this next slide, I want to pause here just for a minute and go ahead and start to bring in Evgeny and Jacque and get their thoughts on this notion of PQC reporting, is not just a one-time checkbox thing, but agencies should really be thinking about this as an ongoing, program that really at all times they have a really good understanding of their agency's cryptographic posture. So we've got a polling question here, but maybe as I throw that out there, Jacque, Evgeny, you can kind of dive in on your thoughts around, hey, this isn't a one-time checkbox thing. This should really be a program that agencies are thinking about.
Right. So I agree strongly with your assessment there, Harvey. And when the government puts out these larger mandates, there's an emphasis on making sure that there's continuity in terms of being able to produce sustained reporting. And that sustained reporting, as you mentioned, it can't be a one-time deal. And it's not because the government wants to levy additional mandates or requirements. It's because we're at the beginning journey of quantum computing. And we're at the beginning journey of a new era for cryptography, but it's also a new business for cryptography. And that new business translates into a new business of constantly evolving threats. And in order for us to get in front of those constantly evolving threats, the need for a constant program and thus consistent reporting is where we are. And when you really think about what quantum computing means or when it will come online, that's the $1 million question no one knows. And even when a quantum computer does come online, you'll still have to continue to report on that threat because the adversaries, they're not going to stop. They're going to continue to try to find ways and to exploit all of our valuable assets. And in order to make sure we're staying ahead of it, having reporting outside of just a one-time instance is something that we absolutely necessarily need now and
Yep.
into the future.
No, I agree. Again, I think people need to come into this, or agencies need to come into this thinking about it as, hey, I'm actually setting up a program here that's going to address current issues, and as issues evolve, as you said, we don't know what form quantum is going to take. Future issues, right? That can be addressed very nimbly and very quickly. Evgeny, but why don't you hop in here real quick too and give us your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. I always have this idealistic view that, it shouldn't be compliance for the sake of compliance. It really should be risk management. And if you have proper risk management, compliance almost becomes a byproduct of that, right? So
Right.
the reality here, look, the catalyst may be those OMB requirements, it may be quantum computers, PQC migration. But what we're really talking about here is continuous visibility and governance of your cryptography. And honestly, that is something that organizations should have had all along, because cryptography is such a foundational thing. This is the building blocks. We just assume everything just works, but really without cryptography working properly, there is no digital privacy and trust. All of that is built on the foundation of cryptography. So really, I don't necessarily even think about this as reporting or even discovery. I think about this as continuous visibility into what cryptography you're actually using, and an ability to govern, meaning ability to say what you want to be using and have that be enforced, throughout your organization. And again, having that continuous visibility to tell you when you may be deviating from what you are expecting. The reason it's continuous because even let's say you build a perfect inventory, you spend 2 years, you have perfect inventory. It's perfect today. Tomorrow something has changed. It's no longer perfect.
Yeah.
That's why it has to be continuous visibility.
Yep. No, I like that. I like that. And we'll talk more about that as we get into this. But I think both of your bottom line points are it's an ever-changing environment, and it's going to be an ever-changing environment. And so you have to have a system that is flexible enough and able to adapt and continuously update. So thanks for that. Okay, Abby, next slide, please. So federal post-quantum guidance, I think this is important, doesn't come from just a single mandate. It's intentionally layered, with each authority addressing a different part of the problem. OMB 2302 sits at the governance and reporting layers. We just talked about that. And it requires agencies to inventory cryptographic assets, develop post-quantum migration plans, and report progress on an ongoing basis. OMB is not telling agencies how to implement PQC. It's ensuring agencies can explain their posture and plans in a defensible way. NSM 10 operates at the policy layer. It establishes post-quantum cryptography as a federal priority and directs agencies to follow appropriate technical authorities. NSM 10 itself does not prescribe algorithms or architecture. It really points agencies to the right sources of technical guidance. And that technical guidance comes from NSA through CNSA 2.0, which applies to national security systems. CNSA 2.0 is where we see concrete technical expectations, including the use of, and we're going to talk about this some, hybrid cryptography during the transition period, and defined timelines for moving towards quantum-resistant systems. Finally, NIST provides the standards foundation, defining where post-quantum algorithms are approved, or which algorithms are approved and suitable for use as standards mature. Together, these mandates form a structural framework. So think of it as OMB drives accountability and reporting, NSM 10 sets policy direction, NSA defines technical transition expectations for sensitive systems, and NIST applies the algorithm standards. So understanding how these pieces fit together is essential, I think, before making architectural, programmatic, and investment decisions. Now, I want to pause because, Evgeny, you were intimately involved in the NIST working group, and maybe you can give us some sense of, do you have anything else to add regarding this layered structure and how it's put together and those types of things?
Yeah, this makes a lot of sense. Yeah, so I mean, obviously, NIST is responsible for the cryptographic standards, including the post-quantum cryptographic standards for For a long time, we've heard from organization kind of almost like as an excuse to not act on this sooner. It's like, well, the standards are not finalized yet. Well, that is no longer there, right? So in August of 2024, NIST actually published the first, 3 quantum resistance standards. So the standards are there. There's more standards that are coming, but there's standards there. Now, with something like CNSA 2.0, they always build in the foundation of what NIST standardizes, but then they have more specific requirements. Sometimes they have higher bars, and sometimes they may disallow certain things that are even NIST standards, but they want to get into a subset of that for the national security systems. But ultimately, the base of the pyramid is kind of like what NIST does, and then various things like CNSA 2.0 and others can select from that as far as what they actually want to do. So it kind of builds on each other, if that makes sense.
Got it. No, that makes sense. Okay, so with that structure in mind, Abby, if you'll move to the next slide, please. Let's kind of look more closely at what OMB reporting actually requires agencies to be able to do in practice. So first, agencies must maintain a complete and current cryptographic inventory. And we say this really goes beyond listing systems. It means understanding where cryptography is used, which algorithms are in play, and where exposure to quantum risk exists. Second, agencies are expected to show that they've identified quantum vulnerable cryptography and understand which systems are higher risk based on things like data sensitivity, mission impact, and system longevity. Third, OMB expects a risk-based migration plan, not a generic roadmap, right? And that plan needs to reflect real operational constraints. So think about things like systems that can easily be changed, systems maybe that cannot be changed very easily, budget realities, and then things, external dependencies that are out there. So just as important, agencies must be able to support what they report with defensible evidence. And finally, as we've mentioned again, I'm going to keep bringing this up, right? This is not a one-time submission. So, hey, let's get it all together and submit it. OMB expects agencies to be able to update reporting as systems change and standards move on a regular basis. So the bar OMB is setting is, can you explain where your agency is today? Can you explain why you've made those decisions? And how will you adapt as requirements change over time? When you look at these requirements together, it becomes clear that I think the hardest part isn't reporting once, it's sustaining the ability to report as cryptography and systems continue to change. Now, Jacque, I know you spent a good deal of time, reviewing the requirements and thinking about how agencies should set up reporting programs. Any insights or thoughts you want to share on this?
Yeah, sure, Harvey. When I think about, well, first we'll start with OMB's requirements to inventory your cryptographic systems. Once you've completed your inventory, that thus becomes your data. And me as a longtime data analyst, data practitioner, I've done my fair share of reporting on all types of mission problem sets. And one of the most important things that I've learned throughout my career in terms of data trust, in terms of data, is trust. And trust that A, you've collected the right data. Two, you know how you've collected that data. And then you look at the methods and analytic rigor when it comes down to reporting of that data. And even more important is, can you actually repeat that process over and over and over again? OMB references defensible evidence, also defensible reporting, and that repeatable process is that's exactly what's going to give that government official a high level of confidence and traceability. That way it can stand up to OMB reporting, it can stand up to government accountability reporting, or even congressional and Senate hearing reporting. Because I think a lot of us, we've probably seen some unlikely government official being dragged down to Capitol Hill, having to report to Congress or Senate. And oftentimes, when you're seeing them in those meetings, they're fielding these questions all from some kind of report. And if they don't have that confidence and trust in that report, they're instantly in hot water. And imagine what that's going to be like when you fast forward some years when a cryptographically relevant quantum computer is actually on the market. And by that time, it's too late. You don't have enough time to build trust. You should have built that trust a long time ago. And that's where we are now, about building trust in your data, building trust in your reporting. So how do you actually get to defensible reporting? Well, the good thing is the government, they told you what you need to report on. So that's number one. That's really easy. They told you need to inventory. They told you you need to look at your cryptographically uh, uh, vulnerable assets, and you prioritize them, and then you look at some of the basic tenets of reporting. It's just collection and analysis over and over. And at a minimum, having a team in place that helps you put those things together around uh, just consistent reporting, having a data analyst, a data engineer, all with the lens of cryptography, of being able to put those things together. And when they put those measures in place for reporting, I think the number one thing in terms of building a reporting structure from that is building data quality in is fundamental to building that trust. And with that, that allows you to get to reporting. And there's so many different ways to do reporting. It really is nuanced in terms of your problem set. It could be a dashboard, it could be a Microsoft Word document, it could even be a spreadsheet. But the idea is you have a consistent infrastructure in place that leads itself back to traceability. That way you can build that trust and confidence in your data over and over and over again.
Great. Thank you. Abby, if you go to the next slide. I think this is where we want to bring in this notion, because we've talked a lot about here's what agencies are asking for. And I think we've emphasized the point that it's not a one-time thing. It really needs to be a program. I think the interesting piece of this, it brings in this notion of crypto agility, right? Or the ability to, the core challenge for agencies is the ability to be able to manage cryptography and their cryptography solutions as a living capability, not a set of static implementations, right? And so, crypto agility isn't this theoretical thing. It's an actual architecture and program that agencies need to deploy. And it shows up in, I think, some very practical ways, right? So think about whether cryptography is hard-coded or abstracted, whether hybrid approaches are possible when you think about cryptography from a migration perspective, whether ownership and governance of the systems and the assets are clear. And I think the most important thing is whether cryptography changes can be made without rewriting applications or breaking trust as we go into the future here. And I think when agencies struggle with PQC reporting, it's usually not because they don't understand the mandate that you talked about there, Jacque. It's because they don't have a clear end-to-end view of how cryptography is actually implemented and managed across the environments. And before agencies can decide what to migrate, they really have to understand what they have, how it maps to the requirements, and where current limitations can make that change risky. Now, we're going to dive into this notion of crypto agility in a little more detail here, but I just want to pause. Evgeny, you're into the cryptography space. Maybe you can talk about this for a minute. I think the real end game for agencies here is not reporting, not setting up, the reporting that's required around this, but it's really how do we begin to move our agency leveraging this reporting program to a crypto agile environment?
Yeah, great question, Harvey. And crypto agility is a very important concept, and it sort of became clear the last few years that people didn't necessarily have a common definition. So as a matter of fact, the last couple of years, NIST had a series of publications specifically on crypto agility to try to kind of get some formal terminology around kind of what we mean by that, right? But fundamentally, Harvey, it's like you said, it's going back to this question of governance, right? Can you understand what you're using for your cryptography at any given time, and can you have the ability to seamlessly update it, right, as you need to align with your policy, right? And you may need to update your cryptography. I shouldn't say may. You will need to update your cryptography, and there could be several reasons for that. There could be a new algorithm that you want to switch to because you believe it's more secure, so you want to be able to do that. For instance, if we look at past algorithmic transitions, like SHA-1 has been known to be insecure for a long time. Even now, if you were to do a scan, there's many organizations that use it. Why? It's tough to transition, right? Crypto agility will help you make it more seamless. As I mentioned, NIST is working on additional post-quantum cryptography algorithms, so there's going to be some transitions maybe driven by the standards. There can be some transitions that are driven by your threat model and your specific policy. In the previous slide, Jacques was talking about kind of how to approach, right? The whole, sort of risk-based, migration. I think that third bullet point was perhaps one of the most important ones, is kind of like this risk, based plan, and that's tough, right? So you have to create it. It's going to tie to your organizational threat model, and that threat model may change over time, which will require you to be able to adapt your cryptography. So the simplest analogy I use here, right now we have a bunch of leaky pipes, polybutylene pipes in the wall, right? And we have to go cut up the wall, cut up the drywall. First of all, we got to find those pipes, then we got to cut up the drywall, put in new copper pipes that are going to be quantum resistant. So the idea is, for the next time we need to do it, wouldn't it be nice if instead of cutting the drywall, we had like an access panel where we can go and replace the pipe, so it becomes a lot more seamless, right? So that's the idea of the crypto agility, and it really is not a single feature. It's a series of things. It starts with this ongoing visibility in terms of what cryptography are you using. It starts with the ability to set your cryptographic policy based on your threat model and actually have your cryptographic software enforce your policy. And then again, back to continuous visibility, tell you where your actual use is deviating from the policy. So all of that, in our view, is how we think of crypto agility. It's a set of those capabilities that allow you to kind of seamlessly change cryptography, again, hopefully without having to cut out the drywall each time.
Yep. No, that's a great analogy. Really appreciate that. If you go to the next slide, what I want to talk about now. Oh, we got another poll question here. If you'd go to the next slide, please. Oh, awesome, you're there. So what I want to talk about this. I think progression, Evgeny and Jacques, that we've kind of alluded to as agencies think about this migration. And so when you strip away the policy language and the acronyms and all those sorts of things, I think preparing for post-quantum cryptography comes down to, and we've talked about a very practical progression, right? So first, agencies have to clearly understand what the federal requirements are, actually asking them to demonstrate, particularly around reporting, evidence, and accountability. That includes guidance from OMB, policy direction from NSM-10, and technical expectations, where applicable. Second, agencies need to understand their current cryptographic posture, not just what systems exist, but more importantly, right, where cryptography is embedded, how it's managed today, who owns it, where making changes will be risky and difficult. And only after those two steps are kind of laid out or completed does it make sense to them focusing on building crypto agility. And where agencies tend to struggle is when they jump directly from, hey, I've read these requirements, let's start migrating, or let's start buying technology and tools, or making those types of decisions without first understanding how cryptography is actually implemented and governed across their environment. We got the results there. And again, I think this reflects, what agencies need to do to make PQC reporting defensible today, and then I think adaptable over time. And then, Jacques, we've got a couple questions here around challenges. So maybe you can talk just briefly about what are some of the challenges agencies are facing as they think about their migration to post-quantum cryptography. That's a question that I was going to ask. And then we've also got a question that actually came from the audience. And maybe Jacques and Evgeny, you can both weigh in on this, but it says, given your work helping agencies modernize mission critical systems, where do you see agencies underestimating the complexity of PQC migration the most? Is it the cryptography itself? Is it the architecture and operating changes that are required to support it? So I think both of those kind of go together. So I'll let you all answer those.
Yeah, those are great questions. I think I'll take the second one in terms of, I think government agencies, or just many organizations, because I've also talked to financial institutions as well. And I think many of us, or many of them, have underestimated the complexity of their architecture. Not even the cryptography architecture is just government architectures as a whole because they're big. They cover cybersecurity, they cover finance, they cover personnel data, they cover mission critical data. And when you look at how these systems integrate with each other or don't integrate with each other, and some of the ones that, or then you incorporate some that may have hardware, some that may have cloud infrastructure, some that may have hard rack servers. And you look at how some of them have and may have been around for a long time. It's a term called shadow IT. And that shadow IT is basically IT that's been around. And you may not be able to see it clearly, but it's there. But if you don't have visibility into everything, then it's a good chance that you could miss that shadow IT. An example of something that can happen if you is if you miss that shadow IT is if you jump straight to a remediation strategy. So you think you have a good hold, you may not have done all your inventory, but you think you have a good idea, and there's some shadow IT out there that some guy created 5 or 10 years ago. He retired. He put in some type of cryptography, some type of certificate, and he documented it in his code, but he didn't necessarily tell everyone, and he retired. You go, you do some remediation, you change out some cryptography, and it actually breaks something. That breaking of something could be a really sensitive financial system that only 2 or 3 people have access to, but it controls so many different things. So the stakes are extremely high. So to answer the question in summary, it really is the complexity of large government organizations and what it and the new side of having an understanding of where all your data and where all your cryptography resides.
Yeah. No, I think that's true. And I think the other thing that I want to make sure I impart on folks today, from my perspective, is getting this right when you start is not just, again, checking a box, say, hey, I did it and I did it right, but this is truly the foundation for this overall migration. And it's a big, almost like a Rubik's Cube you're trying to piece together here as you start this migration, because you're going to get some of your solutions from, say, Google or Microsoft or Amazon or others that are just going to migrate, and you're going to have access to those. But then you're going to have other systems that are internal systems that you're going to have to migrate, if you can even migrate those. So how do you make sure everything is going to stay compatible and everything is going to keep working as you do that migration? There's that piece of it. And then again, as you do it, you don't want to set it up just to say, let me just get it set up and get this migration done and be finished with it. You want to make sure you build it agile enough that as the next change comes or the next requirement comes, you can very quickly change and don't have to go through this whole process all over again. So Evgeny, I don't know if you've got any thoughts or comments there.
Yeah. Just in terms of underestimating, I mean, kind of the big challenges, right? The first one is really this risk-based context, right? It's like, like I mentioned, I work closely with NIST. We're a work stream for this, so I've seen, all the great discovery tools that can be run and can produce a lot of findings. The challenge is how do you take that data and really convert it to information as far as what actually do I need to prioritize, right? And that
Yeah.
that question cannot be answered just by this exercise alone. The dependency there is that you have an organizational threat model where you understand what sensitive data you have, how long is it sensitive for, what controls you have around it. So all of these things have to somehow be inputs into the data to convert it to information. And on top of that, you need to know not what cryptography can theoretically be actually used, but what's actually being used and where, right? So creating this context that can help you take informed action, that is a big lift because again it ties in some things, some prerequisites that many organizations may not have. The second one is really the extent of current, what I would call cryptographic posture management technical debt, because most organizations have never really treated their cryptographic
Yeah.
controls as a key asset that needs to be properly governed and managed. It's like cryptography is like everywhere. It's hard coded, like Harvey alluded to. It's in your applications. It's in your all sorts of environments, right? And so being able to bring all of that and make it crypto agile in a way that you can then migrate in the future more easily and put governance and visibility around it, that's also a significant challenge. So those two areas.
Yeah, and one thing I'll throw in there when you talked about the cryptography debt, right? The technical debt. If you're in an agency and you're responsible for this migration to post-quantum cryptography, and you're not talking to the organization inside of your agency that's doing the zero trust architecture,
Mhm.
they're creating cryptography debt. Just that's Harvey Morson's opinion. I don't know if anybody else would agree with that, but you all need to be tied together because they're making decisions now, and they need to think about this migration to post quantum. Even if they're not ready to go at this moment, whatever they're building, whatever that architecture is, needs to be able to plug in post quantum very quickly down the road here. Okay, Abby, if you'll go to the next slide, please. We'll dive into some of these details now, understanding these requirements for PQC in like I say in more detail. So across government, we're seeing a lot of confusion between requirements and recommendations and between reporting expectations and migration expectations. So we'll make sure we kind of set that up, right? So OMB, for example, is focused on inventory, planning, and defensible reporting, not immediate technical cutovers or migrations. I think it's also critical as you think about these requirements and where they are coming from. It's critical to understand which guidance applies to which systems, right? So you have civilian systems that are out there, national security systems that are out there, and a lot of agencies have mixed environments that are subject to different expectations, different timelines, and different guidance. So that's really why I think organizations need to take the time to look at all the different requirements that are out there, understand their environment and which systems relate to which set of those requirements to ensure that you're not only meeting those, but setting up an environment that, again, is crypto agile, that can support updated requirements and new mandates in the future. And I think finally, and Jacques, you talked about this, right? And I think it's critical. Agencies need to understand what constitutes acceptable evidence, right? OMB and oversight bodies aren't looking for perfect answers, but they're looking for clarity, consistency, and the ability to explain decisions in a defensible way. And so, what we've seen when agencies struggle in this process, it's often because this step was rushed or skipped, right? Misinterpreting requirements leads to potentially overscoping for things like, hey, I'm going by this CNSA 2.0 memo, but wait a minute, that's for national security systems, not non-national security systems. So I've overscoped this thing, right? Premature technology decisions are made. Hey, it says I have to do an automated discovery and inventory. Let me go buy a tool. Well, maybe I don't need a tool. Maybe I've got internally everything that I need. I just need to piece it all together and create a program out of it. Right. And when you do these types of things, reporting, I think, becomes difficult to defend over time. So getting this step right, understanding the requirements, sets the foundation, I think, for everything that follows. If you go to the next slide, please. So once agencies are clear on what they're being asked to report and demonstrate, the next question becomes whether the environment can actually support those expectations. And Evgeny, you've talked about this, right? This is where many agencies run into a challenge because understanding cryptographic posture means more than just knowing which systems exist. Agencies need to really dig in deep and understand where cryptography is embedded across applications, infrastructure, identity systems, cloud services, third-party platforms. But they also need to understand what that cryptography is or how that cryptography is managed today, right? So not just, hey, we have cryptography here, but who owns it, how the algorithms and keys track, how changes are managed when requirements evolve, right? So it's more than just this is the system. There's a lot of systems. And then what type of cryptography is there, but also who owns it. And so what we see oftentimes is really fragmented visibility, right? Some cryptography is well managed in PKI or security system tooling, while other cryptography is hard-coded into applications or buried in legacy systems with unclear ownership. And those gaps don't usually show up until an agency tries to answer reporting questions or plan migration. And at that point, decisions are being made without a real reliable baseline. So without a clear understanding of your current cryptographic posture, PQC reporting becomes difficult to defend, migration plans can become speculative, and crypto agility is really impossible to achieve. So this step is about establishing the baseline, understanding what exists today, and how prepared the environment is to support change. Once agencies understand their current cryptographic posture, the remaining question is how to turn that understanding into something sustainable, rather than repeating this exercise every reporting cycle. So, Jacques, Evgeny, can you talk a little bit more about the importance of agencies truly? I know you mentioned it, but just truly understanding that cryptographic posture and what's the value of that for them there?
Go for it, Evgeny.
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, I think for many organizations, this is going to be a little challenging because it's new. Again, this is not something that they focused on, right? Yes, you may have some of the larger banks that may have had cryptographic center of excellence, cryptographers and staff. Maybe they're in a better position to do that, but they still struggle with certain things. But for many organizations, this is going to be a little bit new. And yet, you're absolutely right, Harvey. The visibility is going to be fragmented. I think the first thing that I would urge you to think about is, not necessarily, hey, what new tools I need to get, right? The first thing I'll think about is like, what do I already have in place today that can actually give me the telemetry, right? Because if you're going to build this program, the ideal situation would be you build this program with as much as possible the existing investments that you have and build on them and augment them where needed when you have gaps. But for instance, you may already have certain products out there today that can provide you with telemetry that you can then piece together and leverage for your risk-based decision making. So really kind of understanding what you have today that can give you those nuggets of information and beginning to leverage that. And then when you figure out, okay, I do have visibility gaps, I do have blind spots, this would be a good opportunity to look at additional solutions. So that's something I would add.
Yep, that's great.
Yeah, I
Jacques?
think one thing I like to add on that is just the idea that, of course, you need to understand your cryptographic posture, but you don't necessarily need to understand how cryptography works all the way. All the governing bodies that Harvey mentioned, and even Evgeny's participation in organizations like NIST, those are the entities that have a real solid understanding of cryptography. But from the practitioner on the government executive side, you only really need to know at some of the higher levels of how some of those different things work and how they piece together. Not necessarily how ML Chem works, not necessarily how ML DSA works. Those things are obviously important, and having folks on your staff to understand pieces of that is absolutely important. But the overarching thing is just knowing where the stuff is. That way you can point to it and you can identify and then figure out how to change it in and out.
Hey, so we've got another question here. I know we're getting close on time. We got a few more slides, but I want to make sure we get to the questions. And so this is another one that came up, which I think is an interesting one. From an architectural and operational perspective, what are the earliest indicators, Jacques, Evgeny, that an agency is truly becoming crypto agile versus completing a one-time, PQC migration? Like, what are the key signs that, hey, we're starting to become crypto agile?
Well, I think number one, you're able to point to at least some of your high priority systems that could be subject to a quantum computing attack that are still using outdated algorithms. I think just having a sense of those high priority ones, that's a starting point that you've already identified. Those are things that are at risk, and I need to figure out. That's a starting point. I need to figure out something to do.
One litmus test I would offer, right? The next time there is a vulnerability, a CVE, in some cryptographic library that you use, how easy is it for you to know exactly where you have that library, and how easy is it for you to patch that, right, and address that vulnerability, right? So if it's a highly manual process right now, there's probably more work to do with crypto agility. If it pretty much happens seamlessly, that would be a good indicator that you're on the right track.
Yeah. No, I would agree with you there. I think the bottom line is sort of time to fix, right? Time to patch. Once a vulnerability comes out, and it's known, how long does it take you to identify all the areas in your organization where you're at risk? And then how long does it take to remediate that risk, right? And if it takes you a month or two to figure out every place you're at risk, and then even longer to get it all migrated, then you're not very crypto agile, right? You should be able to immediately pull up a report and say, here's the systems we're at risk, here's the plan in a very short order. Get those things updated. Would be my thought. So we're running short on time here, Abby. Hit the next slide just briefly. I think we've covered this, where we talked about, the risks that are associated to agencies, right? Without understanding the requirements and putting those things together. So let's go to the next one. Because this talks really about cryptographic posture, if you will. So, once agencies understand federal requirements and have a clear picture of their current cryptographic posture, right, the question becomes how to make it all of this really sustainable, right? And this is what we've been talking about. This is where building a crypto agile program matters. Crypto agility, again, is not about picking a better algorithm. It's about defining how cryptography is governed, changed, and validated over time within the organization. So in practice, this means agencies need a way to prioritize systems. So Jacques, you kind of talked about this with your answer, right? Prioritize systems based on mission risk, data sensitivity, and how difficult cryptography change will be, right? Keep in mind, and we've all talked about this, it's a prioritization process as well. Not everything needs to move at once, and not everything can be moved easily, right? And so that's some of the things organizations need to think about. It also means supporting hybrid operations during a transition period, because you still have to run the organization. So allowing classical and post-quantum cryptography to coexist or be used together where required without breaking trust or interoperability. And then critically, I think crypto agility requires, from a long-term perspective, decoupling cryptography from applications where possible, right? When cryptography is hard-coded, every change really becomes a software rewrite. When it's abstracted and governed, right, change becomes manageable. And then finally, a crypto agile program aligns cryptography changes to reporting and oversight cycles. So instead of scrambling, as we've talked about, to answer the same question year over year, agencies can report progress consistently and defensively as their systems revolve, right? So, Evgeny, Jacques, does that kind of, I think, sum up our notion of, crypto agility and the real importance of it to organizations?
I think you covered it well, Harvey.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Next point, if you would, please. So at this point, I think it should be clear why crypto agility is really not a nice to have. It's essential for meeting OMB reporting and expectations over time. Again, OMB is not asking agencies to submit a single report and move on. Cryptographic inventories have to be maintained, plans have to be updated, and progress has to be explained repeatedly as systems, vendors, and mission change. At the same time, agencies are operating in environments where there's constantly evolving issues or constantly evolving ecosystem, right? Their cloud migration, software updates, third-party services, and new systems all introduce new cryptographic dependencies. And to that, the reality that PQC standards and implementation guidance will continue to mature, and that hybrid cryptography will exist during transition periods. So without the ability to change cryptography deliberately and safely, every reporting cycle kind of becomes a scramble to rediscover information and re-justify decisions, right? So again, bottom line, crypto agility changes that dynamic. It allows agencies to maintain visibility, manage change, and report progress consistently without refighting the same battles year over year. That's why cryptography or crypto agility isn't just about future-proofing cryptography. It's about making the OMB reporting sustainable in a real and operational environment. So Abby, let's do this. I want to get to, we got one more question here. Let's go, Abby, down to the takeaway slide because I want to make sure we have time for questions. And we'll share these slides with everybody at the end, but I want to make sure we hit these takeaways here. So some of the key takeaways, and Evgeny and Jacque, when I cover these, I'll want your take on them. But first, the OMB reporting is really the near-term driver for action, right? But it's not the end goal. Reporting pressure is what brings these issues to the surface, not what ultimately solves them. Second, PQC is fundamentally a program challenge. Cryptography touches architecture, governance, operations, and oversight. And treating it as a narrow technical exercise really is not the right way to be thinking about that. Third, agencies that succeed don't rush straight to migration, right? They start by clearly understanding what's being required, then building an accurate view of their current cryptographic posture as the baseline to start from. And then from there, crypto agility becomes really the enabler to change cryptography deliberately over time. So there are the results.
All right.
So reporting, hybrid operations, and eventually migration are manageable rather than disruptive, right? So the consistent lesson is that agencies that sequence this work correctly, right, follow this procedural process that we've laid out, really reduce risks, control cost, and I think avoid turning PQC into a recurring fire drill, right? So getting all this right and setting this up is really about building the right foundation to be able to launch this program successfully. So Evgeny, Jacque, I know we're getting close to time here, and I want to make sure I open up for some additional questions. Any thoughts on some of these final takeaways that you want to add?
The one thought I'll add is I would encourage folks to think about this as an iterative agile project as opposed to a waterfall project. I think in the world of IT, we learned that agile iterative normally works better. So there's never going to be this, the switch you're going to flip and then magically you're going to go to 0 to 100 from being quantum vulnerable to quantum resistant. So it's about understanding what you have, building that foundation of crypto agility and over time iterating. And so hopefully you become more quantum resistant each day, so you're more quantum resistant tomorrow than you were today. Start with where it matters most. Start with where you have fewer other dependencies, and prioritize, sequence it, but get going, and sort of do this in phases, and then someday you will you'll be where you need to be. But it's going to be an iterative process. So.
Yeah, I I I echo Evgeny's thoughts on that, and also a part on the slides here, Harvey. I think you really nailed it succinctly, especially on the program challenge and making sure that you're really looking at this as a program. And a program usually manifests into some type of roadmap. So if I were an organization, I would consider what type of PQC roadmap or even quantum security roadmap do I need to have in place? And roadmaps are designed to be long, right? It's a long road, and understanding that it's going to be a long road. And sometimes there may be some turns, sometimes there's going to be some twists, but there's an ecosystem in terms of OMB, NIST, and NSM. All these different policies and things are they're manifesting to where it can help you navigate all those twists and turns throughout that roadmap.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's great. So I think with 3 minutes here left, Raphael, why don't we turn it back over to you and see if there are any additional questions from the audience that we can answer.
Thank you, Harvey. Again, if you'd like to submit a question, please look to the Q&A pod at the bottom of your screen. Looks like there is a question
I've
here.
got one here. I'm gonna give this to Evgeny because I think he may know this or maybe the expert on it. So I'm putting you on the spot, Evgeny. It says, can you explain which pillar or part of zero trust this PQC migration fits into?
Well, zero trust, along with many other things we do in cybersecurity, again, it's all built. Much of it is built in cryptography foundation, right? So
Yep.
zero trust is basically, it's cryptographic foundation, a lot of PKI in there. So that all needs to be migrated to PQC. So it's actually a very direct connection. And as a matter of fact, for organizations that maybe have an existing zero trust initiative. I think Harvey alluded to this, but maybe don't yet have like a fully funded PQC migration initiative. I think you can actually sort of tie the two together and maybe even leverage some of the budget, some of the momentum, because it's really two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, I think the other area, so to your point, hey, it's architecturally throughout everything, this cryptography. But I think the second key piece to this is this whole notion around visibility. So there's a visibility pillar, if you will, inside of the zero trust environment, to where you always have an understanding of what systems are on the network, are they updated, what's their status, those sorts of things. So this visibility foundation piece, this discovery and inventory piece we've talked about, I think rolls directly into that piece as well also. Next question I've got here is there a hub or something similar where agencies can come together and tackle issues like an OMB Max environment, or just a simple website? Do you know anything on that, Evgeny? I know you were involved in some of those problems, or some of those.
Well, it's just something maybe useful to folks. So NIST has a FAQ page for PQC migration, so it's a good resource. So in addition to doing the periodic publications, there's also a FAQ. So if folks are interested, I think there's going to be a lot of great resources there on kind of the latest thinking from the NIST working groups on the PQC migration challenge. And certainly feel free to ask questions if there's something we haven't covered. We definitely want to be helpful. So I think that's one resource I'll point out.
And also like to add, CISA also publishes a lot of useful information on PQC. And I believe they had a forum. I can't remember the name, but I know there was some information out there but I would check with CISA. CISA's website has a ton of information on there as well.
Yep. Awesome. Any other questions? I know we're right at the hour, so maybe we've timed this correctly there, Raphael. I don't know if you want to wrap up and close. And if I think our information is on the slides that'll go out. So if you have questions for us, post this. Please don't hesitate to circle back and reach out.